We are recording. So everyone, again, my name is Scott Brown. I'm the Program Quality Director for District 11. This is the 2021 Spring Conference. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is still so nice to say those words, Spring Conference. So glad to have one this year. Thank you for spending some time with us. Thank you for joining us. We are so glad you were here tonight. I'm a fan of Trent Deckard, absolutely. After I heard him last year, at, I think it was a division or an area contest. And I was sold then. So I reached out to him to do the Great Education series last year. And now we've reached out for him again for this, because I think you're going to absolutely be blown away with what you hear tonight. So Trent Deckard is back with us again. You may remember that Trent is a lecturer of communication at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business, an at-large member of the Monroe County Council, and is a proud member of Bloomington's Good Morning Toastmasters Club. Trent comes to teaching after a serious amount of time watching people communicate in a career of public service, the private sector, and higher education at two Indiana University campuses. He lives in Bloomington with his wife, Kyla, and their two daughters, Maddie and Lucy, along with Curry, the rescue cat. Trent will once again be discussing persuasion, with a recap of his previous discussion on Monroe's motivated sequence and how to successfully turn pitches into quick perfection. He will also take us on a sightseeing to a special pyramid that may reach an audience member or two. It is my pleasure. Please help me welcome our friend Trent Deckard as he takes us on a magical journey tonight. Everybody give it up for Trent.
Thank you so much. That was such a great introduction. My heavens, if I don't live up to all that and do a great job, we're going to have to do a refund here for you. It is wonderful to be back with Toastmasters. And when I say that I am a proud member of the Bloomington Toastmasters Club, I'm also a huge proud member of our Toastmasters family. It's such a great organization for me, challenging me, bringing me into new audiences, getting me out of my comfort zone and giving me a safe place to do it. And so thank you for the opportunity to be here. I will jump in on any schedule offered as long as I can figure it out. And I think my friend Scott knows that, and I'm just grateful for the chance. The last time I talked to you all, I talked a little bit about myself, and then I jumped into persuasion. And I, for years, have tried to talk about persuasion in different settings and different groups and get people to rethink the way that they think about persuasion generally. And a lot of us come into it with some negative connotations. So we'll get all into that. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to recap what I talked about last time, just a little bit into Monroe Sequence. Raise your hand, those of you that have heard of Monroe's motivated sequence. Okay, we've got some, yes, and maybe not some. So this will be a good refresher on that. And then I'm going to talk to you about how you can take Monroe's sequence and you can actually move it into a pitch and practice that pitch and get some repetition on that pitch. And I'm also then going to talk about how you can use another persuasive method, the pyramid principle. I'm going to introduce the pyramid principle. And this is for some of that persuasion that's a little bit more complex than what Monroe Sequence allows for. All right. If that sounds good to you, hold on tight. We're going to go through some things here. I also want to say we are navigating Zoom, and what a challenge Zoom is for us. What a thing to learn, right? My heavens. Look what we have done in a year. And Toastmasters, look, we have had lots of challenges in life, but this year we've learned quite a few. And so give it up to yourselves for all that you're doing, all that you're persisting through. That's awesome. It makes me really, really proud to be part of such a group that keeps on going. So anyway, I've talked enough about what we're going to be doing tonight. Let me just say, if anyone has any questions, I will try to answer those. Try to raise your hand. If I don't see them, my screen kind of limits sometimes the number of people that I'm seeing, but let me know. Somebody even feel free to call me out. You won't offend me. All right, here we go. First of all, I want to share a note, and this is particularly special to us Toastmasters. I've taught students I've interacted with speakers. I've helped people through a lot of different things. And I want to give you a note between us Toastmasters. First of all, you belong in the room. As a presenter, we want to hear your ideas. There's going to be a lot of things, right, that you look out in the audience and it feels like, maybe people don't want to hear from me, and a lot of that gets in our head, but you do belong in the room. The second thing I want to tell you is no one's had the experience that you've had, and I don't want to undersell that. You have had some phenomenal and not phenomenal life experiences that made you who you are. As presenters, what a gift to share that with the rest of us. And so I want to encourage that. And so if you've got a little thing ever that tugs on your sleeve and says, maybe I shouldn't go do that, maybe I shouldn't go talk, maybe they could find a better person to jump in that schedule than Trent Deckard, right? Those things pop up in our heads, don't they, friends? Yes. And they mess with us. And the reality is know this, everybody has those moments. So take some solace from this fact that, look, that does go through our heads, but we want to hear from you. And what's more, what a gift when we hear from you. All right, so that's the first item I wanted to share with you. The second thing is, I think that we make life harder for ourselves. I think we end up memorizing speeches that we think have to be perfect, and we get all hung up on that. Give me a hand raise if you have ever tried to memorize word for word a speech. Yeah. Or we try to draft it all out, a manuscript form. Oh, good heavens. Yeah. Those, I say this in my classroom all the time to young business students who really get hung up on putting all these things in these presentations and, I got to get it right. And if I don't remember where the is, I'm doomed, right? That's not helping us. It's never been helping us. What's more, it's not natural. It's not conversational. If Scott and I go hang out after this session, we're not going to script what we're going to talk about. If we are, we might be creepy Toastmasters, right? Right? And so I believe in outlining. And when I say outlining, I mean outline, simple outlines. And so if I have just 3 things I want to talk about with a theme, I might put down 3 words or 3 short phrases, and I might put that on there. So as we talk about persuasion tonight, I want you to kind of know my method and how I think, and how I also try to get in our heads and think about those things that really just wrangle us all the time and prevent our own words from coming out our own mouths, right? So with that in mind, let's turn now towards persuasion. And we're going down that Twilight Zone murky land, right? Persuasion. When we hear that word, thoughts run through our heads. I'm going to invite someone to unmute and tell us, when you hear the term persuasion, what goes through your head. Who wants to help me out? Persuasion. Anyone want to unmute? Yeah, Deborah, tell us.
I think of someone who wants to encourage me to think that the way that person does. I think of someone who wants me to vote for his or her candidate, or to do things a certain way. It's getting me to adopt that person's frame of mind.
Yeah. And maybe not the original mind that we sort of had on something, to kind of borrow from what you're saying. Let's see. Georgia says, getting one or a group of people into agreement with my perspective. Yeah, my perspective becoming the group's. Scott says, a used car salesman, right? Sometimes occupations come into mind. Now, if we have any used car salesman on here, we're not being hard on you, but you come to mind for a reason, because you persuade us. If I get on that lot, you've got me about 9 times out of 10. Mark, tell us what you think of.
Based upon your illustration and the thought of persuasion, I'm thinking everything from sales to seduction.
Yes, right? Sales or seduction. And, the image it shows that kind of creepy thing. And And I would even argue me putting the image, it starts some persuasion too. I always tell my students, the first time I ever remember really thinking about persuasion, I was a college freshman. And I remember I was on the Ball State campus. And I remember there were these salespeople that came the first or second day, and they would sell newspaper subscriptions for, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, Indy Star, New York Times, whatever it was, they were selling it. And this one salesperson got me kind of cornered, and he had a lit cigarette. I'll never forget it. And he had that cigarette within an inch of my face. And he said, oh, you got to get this subscription. You're going to need it. You're going to get to these classes. And that professor's going to want you to read that newspaper. And you better get it now because I'm not going to be here tomorrow. Well, what do you think I did? Needless to say, I got that subscription, right? And it got to class, determined that I did not need that subscription at all, although it was good to read the paper a little bit as a freshman. Probably could have done a better job at that at times. But the reality is that stuck in my head. We get things in our head when we think about persuasion. And again, we get into our own heads and we prevent ourselves from thinking about persuasion in the way that really we should. And here's what I'll tell you, friends. The reality is every single thing persuades. Every single thing persuades. So for instance, behind me, those of you that know anything about me, Scott knows this, I'm a huge comic collector. And so if there's another comic collector that sees my collection behind me, they might think, well, that's the way you got to stack them. They might think that, right? Or what does a presenter wear when they do a Toastmasters meeting for the district? Well, maybe they wear that, right? Or maybe what color are walls? Or how do you wear your hair? Everything starts persuading just by the fact that it's sort of there. Not to mention TV, radio, advertisement, books, all those things that it's constantly persuading us, even what types of books people read. I was on an email chain the other day where someone was talking about the newest book they were reading, and I could just hear in this group email the number of sales going up for that book because we all better get it, right? Persuasion, though, realistically is just around everything. It's how we talk about things, what values we have. And so what I want to encourage you to think about is persuasion is not the enemy, so to speak. Persuasion's just there. We're doing it. We're not immune from it. It's not just the salesperson who got me on campus that day. It's so much more. And so we can be participants in it. And so if you'll recall from my last session, those of you that were there, I really encouraged folks to think about the persuasion they needed to do. So what I want you to do right now is, if you've got, this is what I say to my students, so don't laugh too hard. I'll say, if you want to take notes on your computer, on a piece of paper, piece of toilet paper, back of your hand, whatever works. And I want you to think about your life and things in your life that need persuasion right now. And specifically, I mean persuasion from you. What do you need to be persuading on? Is it at work? Maybe it's that project that's not quite done yet. Maybe I see some smiles. There might be a few. Maybe it's at home. There's someone in the house that's not you. You need to talk into something or talk through something. Maybe it's at school. Okay, so think about that, write it down, jot it down. Again, back of your hand, computer, toilet paper, whatever you work best with. All right. And this doesn't have to be saving the world. It could be, but it could be just, I need to convince my loved one that I deserve to have that new shed. Whatever it might be, you go ahead and put it down. Okay? Now, keep that in mind, and I'm going to reintroduce you to this gentleman. This is Dr. Alan Monroe from Purdue University. You will not often hear an IU lecture talk about a lecturer from Purdue University. Dr. Monroe, my favorite of communication teachers, and he is from Purdue. God rest his soul. That said, Dr. Monroe, it was ingenious. As I told my students in a class meeting, I believe he watched Real Humans and came up with some theory that talked about what they did. And he has what's called Monroe's motivated sequence. It's 5 steps. It's very simple, and you're doing it all the time in your lives. It's the first step, attention, then need, then satisfaction, then visualization, and on into action, call to action. All right, so I'm going to just briefly go through that so you get a refresher on it and a reintroduction if you need it. All right, so here we go. The attention step, you get the audience's attention, because if you don't have it, you have a problem, right? So get the audience's attention. You could do this a couple different ways. You can have identification with the audience. I'm a Toastmaster, you're a Toastmaster. I'm in the Midwest right now, you're in the Midwest, I assume. All these things that we can use to connect, and we do that as community members all the time. You could use storytelling, right? Storytelling, good to set a scene. We love stories. We've always loved stories. That never goes away. From Netflix to fairy tales, we have loved them all our lives, and soap operas too. You could use humor. Got to be careful with humor. I'm always nervous about humor. And a statistic or fact or even a rhetorical question. The important part is that you get the audience's attention to start off, okay? So the first step is the attention step. Mark says, lend me a comic book. I need some note paper. I'm sorry I did not catch that earlier. I certainly have a lot of note paper in that case. There's no doubt. And Scott says, that's not how that works. All right. So we're going to get the audience's attention, right? And when I talked about using that toilet paper, that got your attention, right? So might be a good way to open. So then we're going to talk about the problem, the need step. All right. And this is the thing that is the status quo, the thing that troubles the speaker, troubles the audience, right? It's what needs changed. So as you start to think about that thing you need to persuade on, maybe start thinking about what is the problem? Can you define it? Can you define it to others? Okay. And then will your audience get it if you're talking about it? Next, in the satisfaction step, you're going to talk about curing the problem, curing the ill, okay? And so I think of this very body, physical, medical. When we have problems that have not been solved, they take on other forms, right? If you've ever been up all night thinking about an issue, stressed about it. Me, before a big presentation, I teach presenting and get stressed before presentations because I want to reach my audience, right? And so that doesn't ever quite go away. I mean, it's better than when I was a kid, but it doesn't quite go away. Your audience with their problem are the same way. And so we're telling them that we can get past that problem. And that's the satisfaction step. So we've got the attention step where we're going to get their attention, the need step, we're going to talk to them about the problem, satisfaction, how we deal with that. All right. Maybe you're thinking about that problem you've identified. What is the solution you're wanting to offer? We don't call this the solution step, but it truly is a solution that provides satisfaction. And if Monroe were here, all the way from Purdue, he would tell you, yeah, this is what is relieving the audience members' fears about that thing that is the problem. Okay, next, we've got the visualization step. And this is where we let the audience dream about the solution and what that looks like. Okay, so we're going to give them a little bit of vision. And the image I always use is an image from the National Mall. If you think about it, we sometimes assume and think that the National Mall in Washington, D.C. always look like that, like it sprang from the earth with monuments and things. You know, I think that sometimes people assume that, but it's really monuments that set an image. They talk about our story, right, in the United States. And some of that's good, and some of that's difficult, but that tells stories, and they mean things to people, and they have symbolic meaning and communication. That's a huge thing for us. In the visualization step, we're going to encourage audience members to dream about what life would be like if we adopted that solution, okay? And then finally, after that, we've got the action step. And this is giving them concrete. We're going to go do this. We're going to have you do this to get this started. And so the example I often use to be specific, to be concrete, to be tangible is we've got to collect 5 cans per Toastmaster every meeting. That'll get us 25 cans or 40 cans going to the food bank each week. And then that means if we do that, that's 160 cans a month. That means a total of 12 months we have done this. Now, if we call the Rotarians and we talk a little rival talk with them, maybe we can have a rivalry going and then exchange, we can get them in on it and tell the exchange that Kiwanis, maybe we're talking something about them. We can really get a lot of food. And so I'm going to start off by asking Mark to go get 5 and Don's going to go get 5. And so we're going to be specific with that, okay? So all together, we have talked about these steps, the 5 basic functions of Monroe Sequence: attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. And look where we've ended up. We're back at an outline, because I want you to think about outlines for this one too. We, again, don't need to write down 4 million words to describe that problem that we've got, do we? No, I see some smiles. We could write a book on it if we wanted to, but that's just what we know. So I want to encourage you to start thinking of outlining with this sequence as well, to get you just to talk about what you want to talk about in an organized, great Toastmasters way, but at the same time, really letting ourselves loose to do what we want to do and not reading a speech. I know that that brings us comfort sometimes, but we know our material. We know it really, really well. We just have to give ourselves permission. All right. So we can outline all of that. So what I want you to do, I want you to take just a second, look at that problem that you've got, and I want you to see if you can fill out some of these steps. Think about that target audience. Who is that? How would you get their attention? Would you use a story? Would you use a startling statistic, some humor? Got to be careful, but still, some of you could do that well. Scott could start with humor very well. Then, what is the problem? Can you define it? Is the audience going to get it? Are they going to see it the same way you are? Do you need to change the way you describe the need so that they get it? What is your solution? That's the satisfaction. Maybe write down what you want done that will make this problem go away for everybody. All right. And then finally, you've got visualization. What does life look like when we do this? So I'm picturing that shed in the backyard. You know, maybe things going in the shed and stuff's not clutter in the backyard. Maybe I'm dreaming about that. Or we go back to that food drive example. We got hungry people. That's not a good thing. And so we can do something about it. We're Toastmasters. We're leaders. We can make a difference. We may not gain members out of it, but we're just doing the right thing. That's what we show up to do. And then finally, action. How do I get that all started? How do I make it all happen? So hopefully you've identified some of that and you've sketched it out on that back of hand, toilet paper, piece of paper, computer screen, whatever is working for you right now, you've sketched it out. And if we're outlining, we don't need a lot of space. So we're not writing a master's thesis or a Stephen King novel. We don't need that much space. We're authorizing our hearts to speak on what we know. All right, now that we've done that, we're going to move to part 2 of this presentation tonight. And that is taking that Monroe sequence. I sometimes say Monroe's, and I've done this for a long time. I get real short with it. I probably shouldn't do that, but this is what happens when I teach a lot of classes and get used to it. How do we turn that into a pitch? And this is where that outline starts coming to life. I have to say, I have a lot of love for pitching things. And I don't mean throwing a ball or throwing things at people, although there's times that, you know, you have a little fun. But honestly, I think pitching, which I used to just absolutely hate when I was a student, I think that's a good way to get into the groove of your idea and to get more comfort with it. And so I put an assignment together a couple years ago, and I formalized it into a presentation, and it's getting actually published later this year. And I believe I always say it wrong. It's a journal, Business and Communication Professional Quarterly. I want to say that is the name. It'll come out, and I'm excited about it. And it's just doing some simple things that some of us all need to do, and that I think we take for granted sometimes. So we're going to take that pitch and we're going to turn it into a partner effort. And we're going to start by just me talking about clogging for a minute. I used to be a clogger. This came out in the first time I presented, and who knew how much clogging would help me with stage fright? I'm probably a much better teacher and Toastmaster as a result. By the way, that's just a picture of cloggers. I'm not up there, but I love this image. I think it's awesome. And I want you to look at them for just a second. They are moving in coordination. They are all doing a little bit of a different thing, but they're still moving, and they're doing a decent job at it from what I can tell. But I want you to look at those faces. Look how happy they are. They're having the time of their life. They're not thinking about the audience. Heck, there may not even be an audience, and they're just fine. And that, I think, is where we want to get. And so, Toastmasters, what I would say is we're turning our pitch into something. Let's borrow from our cloggers, our square dance friends. Let's use what they do, and let's try to do it well. And by doing it well, let's have a good time. And so you can take that outline that you've got, and notice not much space that I'm leaving on that slide, and the same for your back of hand toilet paper, whatever you're using. You can write those one words or simple phrases down, and you've got your persuasive pitch. And what I've said in this assignment that I'm so proud about, because I hope it helps people, is that we can have an example. We can quickly come up with that example, speaking from our heart and taking brief notes, and then we can go turn that example into a square dance. And so if you have a Toastmasters meeting and everybody has their pitch, and what you do is divide the whole group into ones and twos. So everybody just counts off. So it'd be like 1, 2, 1, 2, all around the room. Everybody's got their outline pitch. And then you just form everybody around. So you'll see I've got the ones going on the outside, the twos go in the middle. My Toastmasters Club, when we meet in person, which has been a minute or two since we've done that, we got a big church basement. We could just push the chairs back and make a big ring. And from that hard counting off 1 and 2s, we can do the following. We can have the ones offer a pitch for 1.5 minutes, and then the ones receive feedback on this pitch from the 2. So here's my Monroe sequence, what I'm thinking about doing. And it could be me literally just saying, I think I'm going to do a longer presentation where I talk about this persuasive pitch, and I'd love your feedback. And I give it for about 1.5 minutes. Then the 2 gives me feedback. And then the 2 gives their pitch, and I, as the 1, give them feedback. All right? Pretty simple, right? Now, Toastmasters, it doesn't just have to be persuasive pitches. We could do this with just about anything that we do. You could do table topics around the room, people perfecting their answers, maybe people just getting comfortable getting up in front of each other and talking to different individuals. That's part of what we do, is we help individuals get comfortable. And so again, these slides get into just how this works, but once that exchange is done, I'm simply going to move the ones 1 space to the right, keep the 2s in place, and we've just switched partners, and we're going to start all over again. And what's happening is I'm getting more and more comfortable as I go. I'm getting feedback on this idea, so that if Don and I are partners and Don says, I don't think when you describe the shed out back, you're doing it justice, because it sounds like a place where you will hide out from your family. And I go, we don't want that, because that won't help us. So I adjust it. And so by the time that I'm to my next partner, I can maybe change my wording and continue on with what I'm doing. Okay. Georgia says, getting a diverse group to go the same direction at the same time. Yeah. and did Greek line dancing. That is awesome. Absolutely. Look, dancing is a popular thing. We're all shy to do that too. There could be a dancing Toastmasters club. Maybe that's a one for the books there to think about. All right. So after a few rounds, maybe take a break, refine the pitch. What felt good? My students always say this, you know, I thought this was a hot idea, and then I got some feedback. And then they'll come back with some of the most amazing ideas because they heard from an actual audience member that said, I would have done this. And they know, right? And knowing, you know, as the old saying goes, is half the battle. So some debrief and reflection questions that you can ask. How did it start out? What changed? What did you learn? What was helpful in doing it so many times? When I'm in the classroom, I might have a group of students do this 8 times a piece. And you can imagine by the time you are done doing something 8 times, you have it down. Good example, I teach Mondays and Wednesdays. I teach 5 classes, separate classes each day. By the time I'm done, and today's one of those days, and I'm telling you, I feel strong, so I must love what I do. But by the time that 5th class is gone, I know every hook, line, and sinker of what I'm going to do, and I know what did not work the time before. And that's the best thing that I could ever have, right? So you can take a look at this debriefing and think about how did it go, what did it do, etc. And this is a good way to help not just with Monroe's, but really any pitch that you want to do, or just simply getting up and saying good morning. A club could start good mornings like this, going person by person and around, and all those sorts of things to get a little bit of time like that. Here's the learning outcomes that I post for these. In teaching, you always have to have learning outcomes. And the one that is the biggest for me is getting students or participants to utilize conversational delivery from an outline. And this is essentially, particularly for young students, young speakers, or new speakers, this is giving themselves permission to talk about their ideas. We have so much in society that inhibits us from being who we are and sharing what we think and talking about what we know. Mr. Rogers did a great job at helping with that, but he's not around anymore. And so I try in my classroom and elsewhere to really counterbalance some of that gets in our heads and causes us so many issues. All right. So now with that said, all right, I've told you about Monroe Sequence. We've talked about this pitch exercise. And by the way, if you want me to send these slides out, mail them, whatever works, let me know. I'll be glad to do it because I want this to help people. That's why I put it together. But now, let's talk about a pyramid for a more complex problem. There were some hints about that pyramid. I've taught Monroe Sequence for a long time. Georgia, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
I was just going to type in here saying that, yeah, it would be nice to have a set of these
Absolutely.
slides for our group, for our chapter, for our club.
Absolutely. And if you want to take the slides that are on the pitch and use those if you ever need like support doc, do whatever you need to do. And if you make good changes, let me know so that I can correct my errors too. So I want to talk to you about a pyramid for a more complex problem. You know, the funny thing is Monroe's is sort of what we naturally do when we persuade. My students used to do it all the time. Oh my gosh, you'll never believe what happened to me. My head fell off. Can't give a presentation. Can you let me out of it? I'll give you the best presentation ever. Just tell me that I cannot come to class. I mean, that literally is the sequence. That's literally what they do. We all do that all the time, right? You probably have done it twice a day, not even thought about it. But for a workplace, complex presentation, ideas that are a little bit more than that shed that I'm trying to get, right? There's another concept, and this is one that I have been talking more and more about, and this is the pyramid principle. And I want to talk about that and introduce you to that. And I think, again, it could help you with persuasion to have an easier time with things. So I'll just start with this. Sometimes you're in the workplace and you can't mess around with an idea. You have to be or in a professional setting, you have to be very cautious. It's not enough to let someone dream or to get their attention and to just state a problem, right? And so in workplaces, we often have bosses that want direct answers, shareholders that need things immediately, people that's paychecks are on the line for the answer. And so Monroe Sequence, while cool and fun and a natural thing to do, is not always built for everything. And so in this case, I want to talk about a sequence that I think does a better job in dealing with complexity. And look, decisions are tough. You know, one of the things I like and don't like about leadership and help books are that sometimes they can be just so simple. And other times we think about our workplaces and they're not simple. Or we think about that problem we have with hiring or sometimes not hiring, the opposite, right? In managing our lives. And so decisions get tough. And to deal with that, I like to think about pyramids now that I know about the pyramid principle and I've used it just a little bit more. And the pyramid principle, in short, sustains itself much like the pyramids of old. It gets to the point from the get-go, and it sort of starts with that. And if you think about when you look at a pyramid, the first thing that really stands out is the top of it. You know, we've got buildings all over southern Indiana with kind of that pyramid bottom, but we don't have a lot that go like this. And in the world, if you think about how long the pyramids have lasted, I'm not doing it justice by saying it like that, it's really an incredible thing to behold. And this is why it's a wonder of the world. And so I want to introduce you to making a persuasive recommendation presentation using the pyramid principle as Barbara Minto developed. And Barbara Minto she's still very much alive and very much known for taking new college graduates who were rookies, so to speak, putting them into professional settings, using this principle and having them be very good at their jobs, whether it was sales, crafting very complex things into simple arguments, etc. And so I want to introduce it to you now so that you can get your head around it. Now, unlike Monroe's, which is a natural thing that you would roll out of bed and start doing, Minto's takes a minute to truly get it and understand it. But I want to introduce it. I want you to maybe follow up a little bit, think about how it might apply in your life. And as you get more comfortable, start venturing out even further. And if you're using it already, that's awesome. You can help me out just a little bit. So it starts with this structure that you're looking at right here. SCQA sits at the top. We'll get into that in a moment. And the bottom is the body of the presentation called what, why, how. You're sometimes going to hear people call this multiple things. You might hear the what, why, how method, the SCQA. You might hear recommendation presentation, Minto's, pyramid principle. You're going to hear a lot. And much like most things in communication, someone develops it, the rest of us start picking up pieces of it, and the next thing you know, it becomes all sorts of things. So let me talk to you about it just a moment. And I developed a quote that I think captures why I like it. It's an organizer's dream, a problem solver's best choice for managing choices, and a gift to important audiences pressed for time and burdened with headaches. Now you think about it. Every boss, every supervisor, every decider, all of us, we have those workplace headaches that never seem to go away, right? And they plague us and they bother us. And we just want that pain to go away. This sequence is really built to allow a presenter to do what they need to do for that audience member that's the decider and do it in an efficient way. And so to start, we start at the very top of that pyramid, just like our eyes when we looked at that image. We start with that SCQA. SCQA. And this is, I think, the hardest part to get, but it's really the simplest. It's the situation. I'm me, you're you, this is where we're at, this is where we work, this is what's going on. And then we get into complication. Here's the recent thing that's causing us a headache, right? This is the thing that's burdening us. We were like this, now this trend has started. So pandemic's a good example, right? We were all going along and then that kind of happened and here we are. Complication, situation, complication. Then we go to question. And so in this beginning of the presentation, we say, we think we're being asked today, fill in the blank. And so this is taking that complication and asking a question for it. Here's what we're facing. And when we do that, that clarifies really how we take the problem. This is an important part because three of us can look at something. My students do this all the time. We can look at a prompt and we can see three different problems. I once presented students with a case study and it was two business partners and one of the business partners kept selling the company car and buying personal things with it. And I had so many different responses on what the problem was that I was like, do you think the problem is that they're selling the company cars and buying personal? And one goes, well, I guess that might be a thing to talk about. So many of us can look at different things. It's important to state what that question is. Okay. So situation, complication, question. And then finally, our answer. And now when I say our answer, I don't mean just a simplified answer, but I mean an overview answer. Because we essentially, to that question, might be responding with multiple initiatives. But can we give all of those initiatives a name? For example, I used to work for the Kroger Corporation, and they changed some internal things that they did. And they labeled it, these reforms, under the banner key retailing. As managers, we knew if we heard that term key retailing, we were talking about those new changes. Some of them might be dealing with inventory, some of them might be dealing with customer service, some of them might be just dealing with time clocks, but they all went back to key retailing. And so in the SCQA, the A might be a key retailing type label or some name for our plan that sums it up. Okay. We're now going to move into the next portion. So the SCQA is the introduction. Really, you're only going to use about 10 to 20% of your presenting time on that portion because it's very tempting to talk forever about the problem and talk forever about here's who we are and one time we were there, and we can do that forever. Students will do it all the time. All right. So once we've introduced it, we're going to get into the what. And I sometimes like to say the what, because the what is the beef, right? You all remember that commercial? This is the details of the answer. So when we think about that example I was using earlier, key retailing was Kroger's answer to this is how we're making these internal changes. The what describes different parts of those changes. So we're doing this with inventory, we're doing this with clocking in, we're doing this with the way our back rooms are. I mean, they had a million. And so all of that could fit under the what. It might even group under small groups, some customer service, some inventory management, some customer facing, whatever it might be, the what. And the what should reflect what we're answering, all right? So we've talked about SCQA and the what. And I want you to keep in mind, this part, the what, this is what the decider really wants first. They want this after you set the scene. Because you think about it, how many times have you been given bad news or someone says, well, we've changed things in the office and I want to talk to you about that. You want to know what happened, right? And your deciders the same way. They want to know how to get out of the headache, get through the burden, etc. And so the what does that. Once we have the what, we're now going to jump to the why. And this is a persuasive part. Let's take our what and let's come up with the three best persuasive arguments why we're doing this. So it's what, three best whys, and at least one of them should deal with financial circumstances. And generally, this will always be the case. This method is going to be dealing with decisions that often affect business or the club's doing this. And so there's always some financial benefit or component generally. We'll get new members, this does this, because the decision is generally that complex. So the why, three reasons, and one of them should have a financial basis. We're going to earn this, this is what it'll cost, etc. All right, so now we've got that out of the way. We're persuading. And that's when my screen locks up. Pardon me. As it always will. Hold on one moment. Whoops. Every time. Just 2 seconds. All right, one more will do it. There we go. My computer does not want to do this anymore. All right, so finally, the how. The how. And here's what the how deals with. The how deals with the timetable on how long something's going to take. So we will implement this then. This will last until then. It deals with risk mitigation. Here's the biggest critiques of this proposal that we have and how we deal with it. And then it finally calls us to action. And this is important too. We just don't lead with it. The other steps set that foundation, and then the how finishes us up and heads us down the road. And this can get as complex as you want it, but the essential part is, if you think about it, we're covering a lot of different bases with this method. And I want to show you, just as we look at this one last time, this recommendation presentation model, the pyramid principle, Mentos, whatever you want to call it. And you're going to hear, as you look through literature, you'll find millions of names. Just remember Barbara Minto did it, and she'll, I think, be honored in that way. When you look at this, I tell my students the following. This is like a which way book. Whatever choice you start picking on that pyramid, your other decisions start changing. And so, for instance, as the A starts to change, what we're calling something, and the details of the what change because we think we might need something else, or the whys that we choose and the whys that we change, it gives students choices. I used to not believe this as much, and I wasn't a big fan. In fact, I had students trying to do very complex presentations simply on Monroe's. And then I switched to this for this particular type of a presentation. And what I would watch is their creativity would explode. Even today in class, we've been working with this. They have a virtual case competition pitch next week, and their ideas are phenomenal. They're working with a nonprofit in Ghana, and they're coming up with ideas that for 19, 20-year-olds are blowing my mind, and I'm really proud of them. I think you'll find this too. However, this is the learning to ride a bike method, if ever there was one, because it takes a little bit more work than the Monroe method. But that said, it seems to pay dividends, as Barbara Mintos really talked about. So today, Toastmaster friends, I took you through a lot, and I hope it wasn't too much. I hope it was helpful to you. I talked to you about Monroe Sequence again, and I refreshed your mind on it. And then I talked to you about how we can take Monroe's and turn it into a pitch practice. And what's more, we could just dump Monroe's at the door, and we could do other pitches, or we could just square dance and call it a night. We could do all those things. You could even on that one, you could do it virtually with breakout rooms. Takes a lot of work, but you could do things like that, all sorts of options. And then we finished leaving Monroe's behind, and we looked at the pyramid principle. And my goal, my hope for you over all of this is that as you look at these options, you start seeing your options. You start seeing outlines as something that you can do to authorize your best language. And that finally, you have choices. Persuasion is not a captive sport that you're the victim of. This is one that's going on. It's not going to change. And that we can recognize persuasion, we can respond to it. And we can do what we want to do and authorize ourselves to do it. I think as a presenter and a person that has had some timidity in my life, that I like to think about those things that kind of stop that tugging on my sleeve that says, oh, Trent, maybe you shouldn't do it. Maybe you're not the best. And instead, I'm in the driver's seat and I'm choosing, I want to go Mentos today. Or maybe Monroe's. I feel like it's an old personal natural for me. Or maybe I just want to pitch with my friends. Regardless, Toastmasters, you have choices, and there's a lot of strength in that. I'd be happy to answer any question anyone has. or just be quiet if that helps you too. Thank you.
Everybody, please give it up for Trent Deckard. Once again, knocked it out of the park. Thank you so very much. Can always guarantee that when you come to present, you're going to absolutely kill it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was fantastic. So at the end of every one of these presentations, we've given opportunities for questions. We've had some phenomenal conversations. Would love to hear what you think about the presentation. Love to hear some comments about the presentation, questions about it, all of those things.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead, Mark.
So Trent, thank you for this. This is fantastic. And, you know, as a businessman with college students, you've really given us great information for us to use moving forward. However, the one question I have is, how do you know when to move from Monroe to the pyramid? What is that deciding point?
Yeah. So I really look at it like this. I began to notice that Monroe's is a real connected speaker to audience thing, and it's so instinctual. I mean, we naturally just start doing it. However, I know that if I'm going to walk in tomorrow to Kelly, where I teach, Kelly School at IU, and I say, well, I'm going to go talk to the dean about a new initiative that we need some funding for, that Monroe's is just not going to cut it. There's some complexities that Mentos offers that really get you thinking through the choices that you're making for your best idea. You start sort of at that top, because I want to know what the dean wants to know. I want to answer that question. And then I start making those other choices and arguments. I'm not manipulating things, but I am presenting the best foot that I have for it. And I'm also thinking through, that doesn't work, this doesn't work, etc. And I think that there's a naturalness to that choice that is good. Monroe's is a thing I think that can quickly be used to connect and sell something and connect with audience members. But I think particularly for a more complex, you're in your office, you're in work, you're getting a new client, I think you have some more options to diversify that, particularly around finances and other things that need to be covered in a more complex persuasion method. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was a great answer. It's a great question and a great answer. Thank you for that. What else? I'm sure there have to be more questions out there. Georgia.
Oh, I see. Georgia, do you want to comment, or did you want me to read your comment?
I see how it fits in. That's one of the things that I think what the point is that I raised is that I had participated in a needs benefits selling presentation years ago. And the most remarkable thing was what I perceived as the need may be significantly different from what the audience perceives, from what whoever it is that your target audience is. And the same with the results. I may want a particular result and the audience may see a different result. And it's important to modify our perspective, which I think this does in a certain way, but doesn't really talk specifically about it, that you need to address the perspective of the audience, the people that you want to persuade. What is their starting perspective? How is it that you want it to shift? And then address how that shift is going to be accomplished.
Absolutely.
And what I was thinking is that you have at IU, you have the brother of one of the most representative persuaders alive in the world today. The brother of the Dalai Lama works at IU.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true. Yeah, one thing I think both sequences do very well is I think at least, that they get you to think about audience members and connecting with them. I think before we sort of would get up and say, here's what I want to do. And that was our persuasion. I just want to do this. We should do it. I just think it. And that would make sense. I mean, that's, when we're kid and we're born, we want a bottle or we want milk or what have you. And so we might cry a little. This audience connection gets us to think about, I've got to reach them. I'd like to, in Monroe's sake, I want to make them dream a little. I want to make them see what I see on this step when it gets done. On Mentos, I think that it takes longer and you spend some time thinking about, is this a why, for instance, that would work well? Are we thinking of all the risks? And I do think you pick up a lot of audience feedback as that sort of goes on, but there's any presentation without audience is one that it will definitely be doomed for failure.
Well, you use the analogy of dancing, and I mentioned Greek dancing. What's interesting about you, I think it's a great analogy, because particularly in any type of line dancing, it's the number one person that you would think is the leader. That's the showy person. And then you have to get all of the other people to be in lockstep with that individual. However, in actuality, it's the number two person that holds the beat, that the number one person is the one who's doing the twirls and the jumps and is creating all the flash. But it's the ones behind that hold the beat, that keep everyone in lockstep and keep you going the same direction, because that number one person may be, doing their song and dance, but it's actually those that are keeping that person going that keep it in line. So I was looking at the pyramid, I thought it's bigger at the base, that you have more people that lead to that end result, to the peak of that decision, whatever it is. It was a great analogy.
And in class, it's amazing. The students that usually struggle the most in my class are the students that are very comfortable presenters and it comes really natural to them and they take that for granted. And so they will walk in 20 minutes before a presentation with the speech that was prepared maybe 20 minutes before. It's missing sources. They're not thinking about audience. But my students, on the other hand, that really, they have speech anxiety, they struggle with things, they have been thinking about it for a long time and they've been in to see me, and it almost every semester I can spot it. And the students will say, I'll have no issues in here. I've done this all my life. And I'm like, here we go. And sure enough, now it's not always that way, but it is. It takes an effort, it takes a team, and there's a lot of back on the back end work.
Mm-hmm. Well, just as an aside, I don't mean to take your time, but probably a contemporary of yours, I don't know if you remember her or ever met her, Dr. Jean Chambers from Purdue. And I took her for many classes, and I remember one of the first classes that I had, and I did a presentation off the cuff because I was a speaker from way back. I didn't have to put in a lot of time into it. And what I distinctly remember is she said to me, I am so disappointed. I am going to give you a grade that you have never seen before. I am going to give you, young woman, an A- because you do not deserve the A. And the class was an uproar. That was a great presentation. And I hung my head and I waited to see her after class. And I said, Professor Chambers, I will never disappoint you again. So I agree that sometimes the better the speaker, the worse the mistake that they can make.
Oh, that's a good point. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you so very much. This is a phenomenal conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. There's an old saying that we love Toastmasters 5 minutes before we're over. We like Toastmasters at the moment we're supposed to be over. We don't like Toastmasters when we run long. So we are right at 9 o'clock tonight. I'm going to stop recording. Again, can we please give it up for Trent? That was a phenomenal presentation, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This will be posted tomorrow. We are going to stop recording now.